The Birthmark by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Introducing the characters in this story. First, we have Aylmer. Next, we have Georgiana. And finally, there is Aminadab. Now, let's move on to analysis. First off, symbols. Georgiana is gifted with a seraphic appearance that is lauded by many admirers, yet she still possesses a single flaw: a red birthmark on her cheek. Now, the birthmark symbolizes two things. First, the birthmark is symbolic of the bond man and God formed due to the creation. Thus, the birthmark is divine and very much natural. Secondly, the birthmark illustrates man's imperfection. Humans are simply not meant to be perfect, which is why the birthmark is placed inside the story. Aylmer is a man who believes in the potency of science. He gets caught up in his quest for perfection and spends all his time experimenting, writing, and concocting artificial creations that defy the laws of nature. He is symbolic of man's ignorance and hubris because he does not realize the downfalls of his actions. Furthermore, he alludes to the motif of separation, for he attempts to disjoint the worlds of divinity and mortality by removing Georgiana's birthmark. Georgiana is undoubtedly loyal to her husband. In spite of her husband's often cold treatment, she blames herself for his faults and does everything in her power to make him happy. As such, she symbolizes the domestic wife of the time period the story was written. In his laboratory, Aylmer records his experiments in volumes worth of texts. Nonetheless, in spite of the many experiments and unique inventions that Aylmer has created, his laboratory fails to even come close in matching to nature's potency. The decorative laboratory, as seen on the left, is a facade for the true nature of science, for its artificial nature collapses upon itself when Georgiana discovers the boiling, filthy furnace room on the right. The furnace room, where Aylmer does his work, is what truly represents science: a dirty, pathetic mess. Next off, we'll examine themes. Aylmer's lab alludes to a 19th century factory, so the lab symbolizes modern innovations, technology, and science. Nonetheless, all products from Aylmer's lab fail when met with the natural birthmark. This thus represents the juxtaposition of science and nature. Furthermore, his laboratory is full of concoctions and potions that attempt to imitate nature's beauty and power. As such, the contrast of science and nature is seen here as well. This leads us to another theme, the divinity of nature. Hawthorne supports the divine nature of the hand by describing it as the stain of the rainbow fading out of the sky. The shape of the hand is God's imprint left on Georgiana's face, which alludes to God's union with humankind because God created man. Finally, Aylmer's strong conviction and desire to remove the birthmark represents the theme of man's lack of wisdom because he doesn't realize the divine nature of the birthmark, and that leads to Georgiana's death. Ironically, Aylmer's repetitive reminders of his accreditations and education in science contradicts his actual knowledge of it. Now, let's move on to the elements of dark romanticism and anti-transcendentalism. Aylmer becomes rather obsessive, and his dream of marking Georgiana's cheek with the knife displays the dark romantic element of man's sinister nature. Furthermore, the morbid nature of the dream adds to the feeling of impending doom for Georgiana, which is a gothic element. The incomprehensible manner of nature is illustrated by the death of Georgiana. Her death was sudden and demonstrated the power of nature and how nature acts mysteriously. Man simply can't get answers from nature, which is an anti-transcendental element. Hawthorne characterizes Aylmer as destructive because Aylmer's nitpicking of Georgiana makes her feel insecure and inferior. Thus, Hawthorne illustrates a pessimistic view of human nature, which is a mark of an anti-transcendental writer. Now finally, let's examine style. The characterization of Aminadab adds to the foreboding, tense atmosphere of the story. He's the sole character against the removal of the birthmark, so his whispered, "If she were my wife, I'd never part with that birthmark," adds to the foreboding atmosphere of the story. Irony is also used throughout the story. In particular, verbal irony is seen when Aylmer describes himself as a sorcerer. He does this when he's talking about his books, and it's ironic because sorcery and magic contrast with his strong belief in science. Verbal irony underscores Aylmer's lack of wisdom and inferiority when compared to nature. Another stylistic device is situational irony, and it's present when Georgiana and Aylmer identify one of Aylmer's concoctions. They identify it as an elixir of life, but it's ironic because the supposed elixir is actually a poison. Overall, the birthmark conveys that man's sinister attempts to control nature are doomed for failure, and nature's universal truths are incomprehensible.